You remember the silence before the storm, a quiet that felt heavy, almost watchful. The world moved at its usual pace. People went to work. They complained about traffic. They made dinner plans. You were probably doing something just as normal. Maybe you were pouring a cup of coffee, or stuck in a meeting you wished would end. That is when the message arrived. It did not come over the radio. It was not broadcast on television. It appeared inside your head. Every single person on earth heard it at once. A voice that was not a voice. It was a wave of pure comprehension, an idea forced into your mind. There were no words to misinterpret. There was only the cold, hard meaning. We are the Xylos. Your world now belongs to us. You will surrender all governance, all technology. You will become our subjects. Refusal means the end of your species. You felt the collective shock of 8 billion minds, the sudden, chilling halt of global thought. The demand was unbreakable. It offered no room for negotiation, no space for diplomacy or threats. It was an ultimatum from the stars. Surrender your home, your future, your freedom, our face total, complete annihilation. The message ended, and the silence that returned was 1,000 times heavier than before. In that silence, you looked up at the sky. It was the same blue you had always known, but now it felt different. It was no longer a ceiling. It was a window, and something terrible was looking through it. Humanity had received its first message from the stars. It was not a greeting. It was an eviction notice. Your leaders responded as you hoped they would. They broadcast a message of peace, of welcome. They spoke of shared discovery and mutual understanding. A greeting from a species reaching out in friendship. You watched the transmission with a knot in your stomach. It felt like shouting a poem at a tidal wave. The Xylos did not answer with words. They answered with action. Their ships descended from the dark. They were not the sleek craft of your dreams. They were brutalist wedges of black metal. Platforms so enormous they blocked out the sun. City after city plunged into an unnatural twilight. You saw them slide into place with your own eyes. No sound of engines, no fire from thrusters. They just arrived. A fleet of silent, floating mountains. A ring of steel and shadow around your planet. The first contact was a catastrophe. Our greetings were met with overwhelming force. They did not fire a warning shot. The first orbital platform simply activated its primary weapon. A beam of pure, white energy lanced downward. It struck the Pacific Ocean, miles from any land. You expected a massive explosion, a colossal tsunami. Instead, the ocean boiled. A section of the sea, a circle miles wide, turned to steam. The planet itself seemed to groan. It was a show of force so extreme, so casual. They could boil the oceans if they wished. This was their response to your plea for peace. It was a demonstration of their power, a clear statement of their intent. You are nothing to us. Your world is ours. Your compliance is expected, not requested. The sky was no longer yours. Humanity did not surrender. Not yet. You felt a surge of defiant pride. The combined military forces of Earth retaliated. Your planet's best weapons were unleashed. Missiles streaked toward the silent invaders. Advanced fighters swarmed like angry hornets. Lasers, the pinnacle of your technology, fired from ground stations. They painted the dark hulls with brilliant light. It was a beautiful and desperate display, and it was completely useless. You watched the live feeds with growing dread. Every missile detonated hundreds of miles from its target. A shimmering, invisible field surrounded each ship. It was a shield unlike anything you had ever imagined. Your weapons did not even scratch the paint. They turned to harmless clouds of dust and light. Nothing in your arsenal could touch them. The Xylos ships simply floated there, unmoving. They did not even bother to shoot back. They did not need to. They let you exhaust your entire global arsenal. They watched as your greatest powers failed. It was more demoralizing than any counterattack. Like a giant ignoring the bites of an ant. You felt the hope drain from the world. A cold, creeping despair began to set in. Your best was not good enough. Your strength was a joke to them. The unseen shield was a perfect, absolute defense. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. That is a fundamental law. But the Xylos seemed to ignore your physics, just as they ignored your existence. The fight was over before it even began, or so it seemed. Desperation became the mother of innovation. In secret bunkers buried deep underground, a plan was born. The world's greatest minds gathered, not to fight the last war, but the next one. They knew that energy weapons were useless. Projectiles were ineffective. The Xylos shields were too advanced. So they had to think differently. They had to cheat. You were not there, not in those hidden rooms. But you can imagine the atmosphere. The scent of stale coffee and rising panic. The weight of the world on their shoulders. They needed a weapon that could not be stopped. A weapon that followed a different set of rules. Earth's last hope was a weapon thought impossible. It was a desperate gamble, a final throw of the dice. They called it Project Iron Fang. The name itself was a statement. It was not elegant. It was not subtle. It was primitive, visceral. A fang is designed for one purpose: to puncture, to tear, to break through a tough hide. This was the goal. To create something that could bite through the alien shield, to deliver a wound that the Xylos would feel. It was a plan forged in darkness, humanity's last secret hope. While the world above lived in fear, a new fire was lit below. It was the fire of defiance, the refusal to quietly fade away. The plan was not just a strategy. It was an act of rebellion, a message to the silent gods in the sky. You may be powerful, but we are not broken. You will learn the price of our world. Project Iron Fang was underway. The scientists argued for weeks. They modeled every exotic weapon they could devise. Antimatter torpedoes, warped space-time charges, weapons that existed only in theory. Each one was simulated against the Xylos shields. Each one failed. The shield did not just block energy. It seemed to ignore the laws of physics as we knew them. It was a dead end. Until one engineer had a radical idea. She stood before a room of exhausted geniuses. She did not use complex equations. She used a simple analogy. What if you try to stop a bullet with a piece of paper? The paper is destroyed. What if the bullet is moving very, very fast? The paper is still destroyed. Now, what if the bullet is very, very heavy? The answer was always the same. The shield was the paper. They just needed a bigger bullet. So they turned to a simple, heavy metal. Tungsten. Dense, strong, with an incredibly high melting point. The plan was not elegant. It was brutally direct. They would forge a massive rod of pure tungsten. They would accelerate it to a significant fraction of the speed of light. They would point it at a Xylos ship. They would see what happened. It was less a weapon and more a cosmic javelin. Some called it crude, a step backward in warfare. One general famously called it throwing a rock. The lead scientist simply nodded. Yes, a very big rock, moving very, very fast. Sometimes the simplest answer is the best one. There was no complex energy signature to deflect, no exotic particles to disperse. It was just mass. an overwhelming, unforgiving amount of physical mass. The tungsten solution was born. The world's factories changed overnight. Car plants stopped making cars, shipyards stopped building ships. Every major industrial center retooled for a singular purpose: to mine, refine, and forge tungsten. It was a monumental undertaking, a global effort on a scale never seen before. It was all done in secret, under the unblinking eyes of the Xylos fleet. They were hiding in plain sight. You saw the changes in your own city, the strange convoys moving only at night, the power grids dimming as massive forges came online. It felt like the entire planet was holding its breath, working toward a single, unknown goal. They were building the planet's deadliest spear, a single rod of hyperdense metal, 100 meters long, 10 meters in diameter. The process was grueling. The forges roared day and night. The heat was so intense it could be felt for miles. Thousands of workers toiled in shifts. They shaped the metal with immense hydraulic presses. They cooled it in deep, subterranean pools. You can picture the scene: the glowing orange of the metal, the steam hissing in the dark, the determined faces of the people building your last chance. They were not just forging metal. They were forging hope. Each hammer blow was an act of defiance. Every finished section was a small victory. This was not a weapon built by a government. It was built by a planet that refused to die. The first rod was nearly complete, a silent, waiting threat, an iron fang for an iron sky. Creating the spear was one thing. Throwing it was another. You cannot simply point a 1,000-ton metal rod at the sky. You needed a cannon, a delivery system powerful enough to escape Earth's gravity, powerful enough to reach orbital velocity in seconds. The engineering challenge was staggering. The weapon would require a cannon the size of a small city. So they built it. In a remote, desolate desert, a new city rose. It was a city dedicated to a single shot. A massive trench was dug, miles long. Inside it, they assembled the gravity cannon. It did not use gunpowder or explosives. It used gravity itself. Thousands of powerful electromagnets lined the barrel. They would activate in a precise, cascading sequence. They would pull the tungsten rod forward, faster and faster. You can imagine walking through the construction site. The scale would be hard to comprehend. Cranes like metallic dinosaurs moved huge components into place. The barrel of the cannon stretched to the horizon. It looked like a tunnel to the center of the Earth. The power required was immense. It would cause a brownout across an entire continent. For a few seconds, it would consume more energy than all of humanity combined. Building it was a monumental task, a testament to human ingenuity under pressure. It was a bizarre monument to hope, a cannon pointed at the heavens, not in aggression, but in desperation. They called it the Mass Driver, a simple, functional name. But everyone working on it knew what it truly was. It was the arm that would throw the spear, the muscle behind the iron fang. The cannon was almost ready. The tungsten rod, the iron fang, waited in its cradle. But you cannot just fire blindly into space. The Xylos fleet was vast. Hitting a random ship would be a waste, a meaningless gesture. It would only prove that you could annoy them. To make this one shot count, it had to be a killing blow. They needed to take out the enemy's brain. They had to target the command ship. But the Xylos ships were almost identical. Dark, featureless wedges floating in the void. From the ground, they all looked the same. Identifying the command ship required getting close, dangerously close. It required a new level of bravery. Someone would have to fly into the lion's den, to thread a needle through a fleet of gods, to paint the target for the cannon below. The call went out for pilots, not fighter jockeys or bomber crews. They needed a scout, someone with skill, courage, and a touch of madness. The mission was simple to describe. Fly a small, stealth-modified ship into orbit. Get close to the Xylos fleet. Scan each vessel until you find the command signature, and then get out. Simple to describe, nearly impossible to survive. One pilot was chosen, a woman with nerves of steel and a quiet confidence. She knew the risks. The chances of coming back were almost zero. But the chance of saving her world was not. Pinpointing the alien command ship was everything. Without a target, the Iron Fang was just a piece of metal. The pilot would be the eyes of the cannon, the finger that pointed toward salvation or doom. You followed the mission from a dark control room. Your heart pounded with every telemetry update. A lone scout ship, the Nightingale, slipped into the night sky. It was a whisper against the darkness, a tiny, fragile thing against the might of the Xylos. The pilot did not speak. She was focused. Her breathing was the only sound over the comms channel. A slow, steady rhythm, the heartbeat of the mission. The Nightingale darted through the enemy fleet. It danced between the massive, silent ships. On the main screen, you saw her view, the terrifying proximity of the alien hulls. They were mountains of unknown metal, vast and indifferent. Any one of them could have vaporized her with a single thought. She was a mouse creeping through a pride of sleeping lions. But these lions did not sleep. She began her scans. Her ship's sensors drank in data, looking for a telltale energy signature, something that marked one ship as different from the others. The first ship was negative. The second, the third, the 10th. The tension was unbearable. Each passing second was a stolen moment. At any point, an alarm could sound. The shields could flare, her little ship would be erased. Then, she found it. A subtle energy fluctuation, a spike in communications data, a concentration of power that marked it as the Nexus, the brain of the fleet. "Target acquired," she said. Her voice was calm, professional. She keyed in a command. The Nightingale fired a secret signature. Not a weapon. A simple, benign data packet. It attached itself to the command ship's hull, a homing beacon. Her job was done. Now, she just had to get home. The signal came through, a single blinking dot on a map of the sky. The target was painted. Back on Earth, the final sequence began. In the control room for the mass driver, the mood was electric. You could feel the energy in the air. The final checklists were completed. The system was green. The world held its breath as the cannon charged. A low hum started deep beneath the desert. It grew into a deep, soul-shaking thrum. The lights in the facility dimmed. Across the continent, power grids strained. The cannon was drinking energy, soaking it up for its one glorious shot. You watched the power levels climb, 70%, 80, 95. The air crackled with ozone. The ground itself seemed to vibrate in anticipation. The pilot of the Nightingale was racing home. Xylos fighters, small, swift craft, had finally noticed her. They swarmed her position. Her escape was a desperate, acrobatic flight. Alarms blared in your control room. Her ship was taking hits. But she had done her part. The target was locked. The fate of the world now rested on the cannon, on a single rod of tungsten. "Charge at 100%, a voice announced. The words echoed in the sudden silence. Target locked, trajectory confirmed. The final commander turned a key. A plastic cover was lifted. A single red button was revealed. The countdown to retaliation was on the screen. 10, 9, 8. Every person on the planet looked up. Though they could not see it, they could feel it. 7, 6, 5. A silent prayer from 8 billion souls. 4, 3, 2, 1. There was no sound. Not at first. Just a flash of incredible light at the end of the cannon's barrel. A massive rod of metal shot into the sky. It left a vacuum in its wake. A tunnel of empty air. The Iron Fang was unleashed. It ascended with breathtaking speed. It was not a rocket. It was a projectile. A pure and simple application of overwhelming force. A silver streak against the blue. It traveled faster than anything humanity had ever launched. It punched through the atmosphere in seconds, leaving a trail of superheated plasma. You watched its trajectory on the main screen. A thin, white line reaching for the stars. Reaching for the blinking dot that marked the enemy. The journey would take minutes. The longest minutes in human history. The Xylos fleet noticed the launch. Of course they did. It was like a thunderclap in the electromagnetic spectrum. Several ships moved to intercept. They fired their energy beams at the approaching object. The beams struck the tungsten rod. They superheated its surface, turning it incandescent. The rod glowed white-hot. But it did not melt. It did not slow. It was too dense, too fast. It simply absorbed the energy and kept going. The Iron Fang was a primal force, a piece of a planet, hurled with furious intent. It was not a weapon of intellect or elegance. It was a weapon of mass and velocity, the oldest and most reliable tools in the universe. It closed the distance to the command ship, a tiny needle aimed at the heart of a giant. The final moment was upon you. The command ship's shield flared to life. The same perfect, impenetrable defense. The same shield that had defeated entire armies. It shimmered with contained power, ready to deflect any energy, any projectile. It was the symbol of Xylos' superiority, their absolute, untouchable power. It met the unstoppable force of the Iron Fang. And for a fraction of a second, it held. Then, it shattered. The tungsten rod did not deflect. It did not slow down. It punched through the energy field as if it were not there. The shield broke into 1,000,000 shards of light, a silent, glittering failure. The pure physical reality of the Iron Fang was something the shield could not comprehend. It was a loophole in their perfect technology, a law of physics they had forgotten. Mass beats everything. The rod slammed into the hull of the command ship. The impact was not an explosion. It was a piercing. The hyperdense spearhead entered the vessel. It tore through decks, bulkheads, and power conduits. It passed through the entire length of the mountain-sized ship. In less than a second, it exited the other side, still glowing, still moving at an impossible speed. It continued its journey into the cold, dark void. The alien's perfect defense met an unstoppable force. The result was inevitable. The tungsten rod had delivered its message. It was a message of pure kinetic violence, a message that even gods could understand. Your shield is worthless, your power is not absolute, and you are not welcome here. The command ship was mortally wounded. For a moment, the Xylos command ship just hung there, a hole drilled clean through its center. Then, it broke apart in a flash of brilliant, silent light. There was no sound in the vacuum of space, no mighty boom, just a blinding, white flash. The ship's core went critical. It erupted in a wave of pure energy, a silent, expanding flower of destruction. The ship did not explode outward. It imploded first, then erupted. The forces holding it together vanished. The massive vessel tore itself to pieces. Huge sections of the hull spun away into the dark. The command center, the bridge, the engine rooms, all ceased to exist. They were transformed into a rapidly expanding cloud of incandescent shrapnel. A sun had been born and died in an instant. This new, deadly sun shone upon the fleet below. Debris from the command ship rained down. Chunks of metal, some as large as buildings, slammed into the other Xylos platforms. Their own shields flared, trying to absorb the impacts. But this was not an attack they expected. It was a fratricidal rain of ruin. The perfect formation of the alien armada was broken by its own falling leader. You watched on the screen, speechless. The sight was terrifying and beautiful. A silent, blossoming chaos. The heart of the enemy fleet had been ripped out. The brain was gone. The central nervous system had been severed. It was a single, perfect shot, a wound from which there could be no recovery. The Iron Fang had done its job. The effect on the Xylos fleet was immediate and catastrophic. Without their leaders, the armada fell into disarray. Their perfect geometric formation became a panicked scramble. The ships began to move erratically. Some fired their weapons at nothing. Others simply drifted, their lights flickering. They were a body without a head, a machine without an operator. Their communications network flooded with noise. You could not understand the language, but you could understand the panic, the confusion, the fear. These beings, these silent, untouchable gods, were afraid. They had believed themselves invincible. Humanity had just shown them otherwise, and they did not know how to react. It was a feeling they had likely never experienced. Their panicked retreat began. Ships turned and boosted for deep space, not in an orderly withdrawal. It was a frantic, chaotic flight. They collided with each other. Their movements were clumsy, inefficient. Their perfect military discipline had evaporated. They were no longer a proud armada. They were a scattered mob, fleeing a fire. They wanted nothing more than to escape this system, to escape the world that had struck back with such impossible force. You watched them run. The dark wedges that had blotted out your sun were now fleeing from it. They abandoned their orbit. They left behind their dead. They ran from the tiny, blue world that had refused to break. The fleet in chaos was the most beautiful sight you had ever seen. It was the image of fear in the face of an enemy who was supposed to have none. A new day began on a planet that refused to die. The sun rose over a sky that was finally clear. The last of the Xylos ships vanished into the void. Their shadows were gone. The unnatural twilight they had cast was lifted. You walked outside and felt the clean, warm light on your face. You had forgotten how good it felt. The sky was yours again. The world celebrated, not with loud parades or boastful speeches. It was a quiet, deep, and profound sense of relief. A shared breath that circled the globe. Strangers smiled at each other on the street. There was a new understanding between people, a sense of unity forged in the face of extinction. Humanity had faced the ultimate test, and it had not been found wanting. The pilot of the Nightingale had made it home. Her battered ship was a symbol of incredible courage. The scientists and engineers of Project Iron Fang emerged from their bunkers. They blinked in the unfamiliar sunlight. They were heroes, every one of them. They had built the arm that saved the world. They had thrown the rock that slayed the giant. You looked up at that peaceful blue sky. The Xylos had come with a terrible demand. They had spoken with the voice of gods. They expected a silent surrender. But humanity had answered them, not with words, but with action. You had answered with a thunderous silence of your own, Your defiant dawn had arrived, and you knew the universe was listening now.